Good morning, welcome to Classics Week 2021. In the assembly I gave last year to introduce Classics Week, I talked a little about some areas where Greek and Roman subject matter has provided a source of fascination and inspiration for contemporary society. There was the psychologist Jonathan Shay and his use of the stories of Homer's Iliad to help treat traumatized soldiers recovering from their shocking experiences of war. And there were the retellings of Greek and Roman myths that have been appearing over the last few years in books which can interpret their subject matter in bold new ways. The work, for example, of Madeline Miller, Margaret Atwood, and Natalie Haynes. And of course, Stephen Fry's work too. This year, the whole focus of our Classics Week will be on the theme of the intersection of the ancient and the modern. The aim will be to highlight and explore some of the very many ways in which Greek and Roman antiquity has been influential in the recent past and in the present day. The hope is that there will be something on offer for everyone. Before looking at the week ahead, let's consider the ancient and modern theme itself. If I were to attempt a crash course through what's most familiar here, I might start with what you'll already know from your earliest Latin lessons, with the ways the Greek and Latin languages form and shape the English language, giving us a majority of the words that we use in English, and with the ways the societies of Greece and Rome gave birth to cultural, religious and political forms that continue to occupy a central role today in the modern world. We can think here, of course, of theatre, which was born in ancient Athens, of philosophy, of democracy as a political form, of the reshaping of Judaism and Jewish history, of the birth of Christianity as a world religion. And what about the obvious visible traces of Greek and Roman culture in so much of the art and architecture we encounter? We might think also of the achievements of ancient Greek and Roman science and technology, of road building, aqueducts, shipbuilding, map making, engineering, farming techniques and technology. In all of these areas, the Greeks and Romans made influential advances which in turn have shaped the science and technology of modernity. So far, perhaps, so familiar then. But let's not forget either what we might label the altogether more ugly elements of the classical world. For this was a world riven by legalized violence, a world of slavery, of widespread cruelty, of patriarchy and misogyny, of political tyrants and bloodthirsty generals. When we confront the world of classical antiquity and its legacy, there's clearly no room for simple-minded celebration, any more than there is for simple-minded condemnation. We're faced instead with the challenge of trying to understand societies that can certainly be seen as all too flawed, all too human, that force us to look on with sadness and horror as much as they can nevertheless command our deepest admiration. If we can allow ourselves to have an open-ended conversation with everything we find in these societies and with the nature of their influence, we might find it possible to tell a rich and deep story not just about the past, but about the contemporary world of our own. That, at any rate, will be a guiding principle in the week ahead. So, to get the ball rolling, some examples from me of how an engagement with classical antiquity has produced various striking results in modern settings. Consider first the case of democracy, a political form born in classical Athens. The word democracy means rule by the people, and the Athenian idea was that all freeborn citizens should have a part in running the state, that no single individual should rule over others. This was a radical idea at the time, and it's remained so in most times and places since. This book, by the historian Jennifer Roberts, is a wonderful treatment of the history of how democracy has been viewed through time from ancient Greece to the present. After the demise of the ancient Athenian democracy at the end of the 4th century BC, democracy as a political form went into a scarcely broken period of hibernation for many centuries. Throughout that period, democracy was widely rebuked and dismissed. Only over the past 2.5 centuries has democracy come to be established once more as a valued political form. As an aside here, democracy's modern forms do look in various ways very different from its ancient Athenian form. Well, with the growth and spread of democracy over the course of the long 19th century in Britain, the ancient Athenian model of politics was itself taken very seriously. In George Grote's widely read History of Ancient Greece, Victorian readers encountered a positive vision of democracy for society, a vision which matched the changing political horizons of their own time. Greek democracy here supplied a reassuring set of principles and precedents for the ongoing British adoption of democracy, so the British could begin to imagine themselves as the modern heirs of the ancient Athenians, as democrats. This would have been an unthinkable leap of the British imagination just a century or so previously. As I've said, the ancient Athenian model was viewed with deep hostility through most of its afterlife, including throughout most of British history. But in the New Age, the Athenian model of government by the people, filtered in various ways through the lens of 19th century ideology, came to the fore as the vital model for modern British politics and society. Consider next the birth and infancy of a major modern academic discipline, the discipline of psychology. As good North Londoners, you'll doubtless be aware that the key figure in the emergence of this discipline was a sometime resident of our own local neighbourhood, Dr. Sigmund Freud. You may even have visited Freud's old house, now known as the Freud Museum, near Finchley Road. Any visitor to this house, where Freud lived in his later years, having emigrated to London in the 1930s, will have been struck by the nature of his decorations. In addition to a sizable library of books, throughout his downstairs study you can see countless statuettes, figurines and trinkets of ancient religious devotion. If you visited the doctor for a session of psychoanalysis on his famous couch, you'd do so surrounded by this collection of ancient artifacts. Freud's fascination with the world of ancient tragedy and religious myth was fundamental to his development of psychoanalysis. And the doctor's engagement with ancient subject matter fed directly into his most influential theories. His idea of narcissism, for example, a psychological condition characterized by an obsessive fascination with the self, takes its name, as you probably know, from the mythic character Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. This causes Narcissus to lose touch with the realities of the world around him, and costs him the chance of a fulfilling life, and the chance of happiness with the nymph, Echo, who falls in love with him. And of course there's Freud's notorious theory of the Oedipus complex, a theory which found a stimulus in the writing of the Athenian playwright Sophocles and his tale of the king of Thebes who blinds himself. Freud's Oedipus complex sets out some of his central ideas about the structure of the human personality, of the ego, the superego, and the id, of the relations between what he calls the conscious mind, the pre-conscious mind, and the unconscious mind. For Freud, as for other groundbreaking modern thinkers, classical myth and culture could function as a source of intellectual inspiration and vitality. Knowledge and engagement with the ancient writing of Sophocles produced, with Freud, something strikingly original, something that continues to speak to the present, even, enlarging and enriching existing ways of seeing the world. Consider finally the use made of another tragic hero, Antigone, during the Second World War by the Parisian playwright Jean Anouilh. Living under German occupation, Anouilh adopted the figure of Antigone in his rewritten version of Sophocles' play. He seems to want to convey a subtle message about resistance to the French public in his play. The logic of Anouilh's choice of Antigone as a hero seems to be dictated by the need to escape the notice of the Nazi censors. The classical past provides him with a relatively uncontroversial setting in which to convey political ideas to his audiences. But exactly what Anouilh's political message was remained an open question. Antigone serves in his play as a paragon of political resistance, of strong-minded independence, and as a voice for freedom and the rejection of tyranny. But she comes off worst in her struggle with Creon, the unbending tyrant of her city, and she dies for her principles, refusing to comply with his attempts to control her. Is the message of Antigone's experience in the play one about the importance of resistance, of standing for your principles, of defending your liberty, even to the bitter end, and at the price of your own life? Or is it instead a message about the capacity of fair-minded law and order, of administration and bureaucracy, to keep troublesome citizens who flout the norms and expectations of a community under control, so that if in the end a nasty fate does befall them, this happens very much at their own behest? There's an ambiguity here, in the end, about whether Anouilh's play is in fact anti or pro-German occupation. One observer of the reception of Anouilh's play in wartime Paris noted that a sense that the play was pro-Nazi was probably what convinced the Nazi censors themselves to allow it to be staged at all. And to many, it seemed that Anouilh needed to cloak his real perspective in some ambiguity, so as to convey his message of resistance successfully. Well, I hope that all gives a small indication of the sort of thing that lies ahead this week. We have a broad range of talks and sessions planned, all relating in one way or another to our ancient and modern theme. You'll find sessions on poetry, philosophy, archaeology, cartoons, satire, history, science fiction, theatre, and more besides. And we welcome on Tuesday Professor Edith Hall from King's College London, who'll be talking to us about modern audiences' views of Greek tragedy. And on Thursday we'll host Dr. David Butterfield from Cambridge University, who will be speaking about what the ancient poet and philosopher Lucretius might have made of the 21st century. Please do come along and engage with these sessions or listen to a recording or two. There'll also be an opportunity to try a classics quiz. The timetable for the week's events has been circulated by email, and a Classics Week team has been created on Teams. It'll be straightforward to attend all sessions through that. Very best wishes from all of us in the Classics department and from the Classics Society team for a fun and interesting Classics Week, and very best wishes too for a good half term when the time comes.